Sweet.
I was going to see which one I am. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'm Mike 2.
I'm Mike 1.
Mike 1. Mike 1. Welcome.
You're Mike also.
Welcome to the Frequenaut podcast. Frequenaut. Yeah, I made that up. That's my coin term. A sailor of frequencies
Right.
on the way to freedom and truth.
Ah, free, and it's got free in it too, so
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frequenaut.
So, you and I have discussed and I just discussed it before with some of the other guys, the synchronicities at play that led us to being in this conversation. I was researching something else. I found the Way Forward podcast, and your name popped up. I clicked on it. I liked the look of you on the thumbnail, and you were discussing your two, well, would you say, well, there's many fields of study, but the main two that you were discussing were biogeology and titanology. And now I just want to say to everybody, this is kind of the ethos of Frequenaut, the Frequenaut podcast, and the Frequenaut platform in general, is to recognize that our logic, what we consider to be true or real, the reality that we accept and believe, is based off of very, very limited data, being the life experience that we've had, that we end up repeating and reticulating through our mind, and anything that attempts to challenge it challenges our identity at some point, and it leads to an autonomous rejection of notions or ideas that just simply don't fit. So I just want to ask everybody to suspend their disbelief, because even for myself, I like to live by that by that ethos. When I came across biogeology and titanology, though I had heard of things akin to the topics, I still felt that because again, we outsource our intelligence to authorities and smarter people than us, and we kind of go, well, if that was true, then some expert would have told me. But I just, the older I get, the more experience I have, the less I know in reality.
Trust the experts.
Yeah. So if you could just, because I couldn't possibly break down what your fields are as well as you could. So if you could give us a little look into what the fields entail.
Sure. I was just thinking the reactions that you were talking about, and this concept of cognitive dissonance, where when people are presented with ideas that completely challenge like cornerstones of their beliefs about reality, that instead of being open-minded and going, oh, that's interesting, I hadn't thought of that before, and could there be a merit to these ideas, there tends to be this, emotional reaction, what we call cognitive dissonance. And like you said, there's all kinds of experts out there that will say that the ideas that we're going to be talking about today are ridiculous, and have no basis in science. And so I call it expertitis, because and it works both ways. You can have the inflammation of experts because you are relying upon them, or you can be an expert who's inflamed because you have a set of foundational beliefs about whatever thing it is you're talking about or champion, that are based on erroneous thinking or logical fallacies, or that you think the science is settled, but maybe it isn't settled. I mean, ultimately, there's no such thing as settled science, because it's antithetical to the scientific method, which is constant inquiry and examining the evidence, and then formulating hypotheses and going out and investigating and throwing things out when they don't match. So I started looking into the subject of geology just out of curiosity, about 8 years ago after coming across a number of videos that were basically challenging some of the cornerstones of geology when it comes to how old things really are, how did they come about, how did they form, and I thought it was fascinating. I was like, wow, I hadn't even pondered the seeing the world through these eyes. And then as I started to look into it, investigate it, I found so many data points that lined up with other theories that are not in alignment with the mainstream geological paradigm, that eventually I coined the term biogeology, or I appropriated it is a better way of saying it, because it's a term that's used in science to describe the interaction between the biosphere and the lithosphere. And there's this like percolation of materials that go between the two. And it has to do with this time in the past when we had megaflora and megafauna, which are gigantic plant and animal life. And even the mainstream narratives discuss these things. And so, if you had all of this extra plant life, then you would have a lot more carbon and perhaps more atmospheric pressure, and things would grow to much larger sizes. And there's actually experiments that have been done where people have taken like a tomato plant or a cherry tomato plant and put it inside of a pressurized room, and there may have been other steps involved, but this plant grew to enormous sizes, and instead of cherry tomatoes, you got regular sized tomatoes by the thousands. And so that's biogeology in the mainstream. But I appropriated the term because I was trying to have a placeholder term to distinguish between the crazy kinds of things that I was finding that didn't match mainstream geology at all, and these alternative theories that I was presenting. And I needed a way to distinguish between the two, because ultimately, if the mainstream geological narrative were accurate, or I should say that if the things that I'm talking about were accurate, those would be geology. But we already have these other theories, so it's just a way of for the time being, as a placeholder term, like separating between the two. So ultimately it shouldn't be needed. And titanology was tongue-in-cheek, because I've gone deep into this subject of titans, which are spoken about in the mythologies and the religious texts, and our myths, our legends, our fairy tales. We have these stories of giants and Paul Bunyan and themes like rapid petrification, which come up a lot in my work, where it doesn't take millions and millions of years for something to turn to stone like a petrified tree, but that there are certain conditions in which it can happen very quickly. And we're not taught about those.
But they're accepted, aren't they? They're accepted, but they're not spoken of?
Not really. Petrification, in the mainstream model, they have a term that they use called pair mineralization. And basically what it is if you have a tree that's dying, or that it's fallen over, and it gets covered in mud, for example, then over long periods of time, the water and the gas that's in the tissues of the tree will work their way out, while the mineral content in whatever is surrounding the tree will slowly work its way in. And that is known as pair mineralization. But we're given timelines of 200 million years for such a thing to occur. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of examples of different experiments that have been done where they can create petrified wood in a laboratory in as little as 24 hours, that is so identical to naturally occurring petrified wood that it's indistinguishable under a microscope. There were some scientists in Japan that took 7 different pieces of wood and suspended them in hot, like volcanic mineral water. It's rich in mineral content, and you've got the heat there, and so those minerals are infusing their way into the wood. And so they fished out one of these pieces each year over a 7-year period of time. And by the 7th year, it was fully petrified. So if they can create it in a lab in 24 hours, and you can drop it in hot mineral water for 7 years and it's fully petrified, then where are we getting these timelines of 200 million years, which are completely unfathomable? And And so then you get into all the different dating techniques that they have in geology and these complex scientific experiments, carbon dating and many others, to determine the age of things. And what you find as you dig into them is they're highly inaccurate. Like carbon dating is accurate to thousands of years, supposedly. But as you get into longer and longer timelines, it gets, the deviation is incredible. And then there are examples of people taking things that are known to be young in for testing, and they're given very large dates.
Okay.
You know, so I'm not an expert on those things at all. I have no background in those kinds of sciences, so I'm not. I don't go after them directly, but the empirical finds that I've been presenting on my channel over the last 8 years, there are a lot of them that completely contradict our mainstream model. And that's kind of how it all began for me. It's just looking at things with new eyes and going, well, the term biogeology, the reason I chose it is because I was trying to distinguish between the mainstream geological narratives, which is that our rock, our stone, all these layers of strata that we see around the world that comprise our mountains, that these are formed over hundreds of millions of years. And it's essentially plant and animal life that's being compressed down. And that compression leads to greater and greater pressure and heat, and then that starts to melt and metamorphosize. So we call that metamorphic rock. And that would be like your marble, where you have different swirls moving through the stone. And I was always fascinated by those kinds of stone structures, because as a chiropractor, which is my trade, I studied a lot of anatomy, and I also studied histology. So when you're looking at things under a microscope or just slicing flesh or whatever and looking at what it looks like, there's a lot of stone around the world that looks exactly like that. And I was always like, wow, that looks like tissue. It almost looks anatomical. And there's a term known as pareidolia, which is basically, it's a false pattern recognition, where we see a face in a cloud and most people are like, oh, that's cool. There's a face there, and then it's gone. But you know, most normal people are not going to go, that was a real face, or that was some kind of an entity looking back at me. More spiritually minded people might. But to look at stones and see a face or something, we're taught that that's not possible, and so you're basically suffering from a delusion. And apophenia is a similar concept, which is it's a pattern recognition that's inaccurate. So you're recognizing some sort of a pattern that you think is reoccurring, and you attribute it to something, but you don't know what you're talking about.
I had someone actually explain this to me a few years ago, and they said apophenia is like if there was an increase in airplane accidents at the same time that hot dog sales went up.
Yeah.
And you were trying to link the two and create a pattern recognition.
Yeah.
Because of it.
Yeah, if you sneeze and a window breaks, did you cause the window to break with your sneeze, or did something else happen? Now, okay, maybe it's just a chance occurrence, right? But if you sneeze again and another window breaks, are you breaking it with your sneeze, or is there somebody outside the window that's shooting at you? You know, it's like, well, you know. So, yeah, apophenia, pareidolia. When people are looking at my research that are critical, they'll talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that you start to learn about a subject and you think you've got a handle on it, and you're suddenly an expert, and so you're talking about things that make no sense to the real experts, and yeah, you've kind of overstepped your bounds and you're out of your realm of expertise. So that would be the Dunning-Kruger effect. They would definitely accuse me of that, or of cherry picking my information. And, yeah. So so biogeology is just a term to represent a far more direct connection between biology and geology than we were taught. Because the cycle of petrogenesis being the genesis of stone, the creation of stone, is this sedimentary layer model, metamorphic, and then eventually it gets down where it's so hot that it turns to magma. And that, at the center of the earth we have all these stories about how the earth is composed, and then that magma works its way up through fissures and then comes out in the form of lava, and we call those volcanoes. So that those things also happen, and you can witness a volcano in action. You can see the lava cool, and then you have igneous stone. So you go from sedimentary to metamorphic to igneous, and it's this cycle. And but the initial thing is coming from all the plant and animal life that are dying and compressing. And so what the things that I found and all the evidence that I presented on my channel is that there are many examples of rapid petrification of different biological things that have petrified in what appears to be a very rapid period of time, and and also gigantism and this idea of titans or megafauna. You've got megaflora, which is plant life, and megafauna, which is animal life. And they give us the stories of dinosaurs, and they talk about times where the trees and the plant life were far, far larger than what they are now. So even in the mainstream model, we get that. But it's never, ever in alignment with the ancient myths and stories and legends and fairy tales and religious texts. That was all superstition and, primitives with creative minds. And then we get the narratives of dinosaurs and comet strikes, and that they were wiped out 65 million years ago by this cataclysmic event. And so catastrophism is also a big part of my channel, looking at the evidence for different times in the Earth's history where there has been some major event where most of the life was killed off. And even in the mainstream model, they talk about 5 different periods of time when that's happened. And we know that because we can see the fossil record, all of these different species that are there and fossilized that are no longer in existence. So we know they were once upon a time. Like they talk about the Cambrian explosion, where there was just this, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's just massive amounts of different kinds of animal life, and then they got wiped out. And then the next, event happens, and then most recent of them being the dinosaurs and the comet strike. So I think that there have definitely been these kinds of events, but it's different from what we're taught.
Yeah, it's funny to me. I prefaced this conversation by saying I felt that skeptical pullback immediately until I started diving into it and looking at it over and over and over, and then the lens starts to widen and you start to recognize things for, oh my God, there is a high likelihood based on what you've presented that these things are real. And also too that, as you said, large like megafauna, megaflora is accepted, dinosaurs accepted. We've got this cherry tomato experiment, which if you want to look that up, it's on YouTube. It's quite an old experiment. It would have been in like 60s or 70s or something like that.
I don't recall the name of the guy who did it.
I don't recall it either, but I think he ended up putting the plant in a supermarket, a shopping center, so that it could fit in the building, and it was thousands of these regular tomato-sized cherry tomatoes. So all of that's accepted under the right conditions, but then we the acceptance of anything larger or anything that might be attached to myth is immediately cut off.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't thought about until just a couple of days ago, really. I went, oh my God, why do we think this is okay, but this is not, when they're not that far apart in reality?
Yeah, we have the stories of Jack and the Beanstalk and Paul Bunyan and
but they're fairy tales.
Right.
Right,
they're for children.
Yeah.
And so my initial foray into these topics came because I was exposed to some of these different ideas that were challenging the mainstream model when it came to the origin of stone. And I was fascinated by the Titan subject. As a kid, I loved the movie Clash of the Titans, the 80s version. There's a newer version now. And in that story, Perseus, I think is his name, he's got to defeat Medusa, who is one of the Gorgons, who is this snake-haired creature that turns things to stone instantaneously when she gazes upon them. And he had to cut off her head in order to take the head and save Princess Andromeda, who had been tied to a stone by Poseidon because he was angry for some reason. and the kraken was coming up out of the sea to devour her, and so Perseus arrives in the nick of time to use the Medusa head. Even though she's dead, it's still capable of petrifying, to petrify this kraken. And I see the Medusa myth as I think it's called an anthropomorphization, where we're attributing human-like qualities to a phenomenon. And I think that that's a metaphor for a plasma apocalypse, because there's a lot to suggest that plasma is capable of rapid petrification.
Yeah, and this is actually, I couldn't remember until a couple of days ago where
And just to say, plasma moves in tendrils like her snake hair would. That's
yeah. Anthropomorphization or something like that. What was I saying? I couldn't remember where I had heard, when you were talking about this plasma event and you were describing it as, plasma conducting and electrical storms conducting inside of volcanoes. It reminded me that there was supposedly a time in the Earth's history where it underwent 1,000 years of, and this may be an exaggeration, but 1,000 years of lightning storms. And then I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and he brought it up. I think it was called Toba volcano. It was a super volcano that was said to have basically extinguished whatever percentage of the human population down to about between 3,000 and 15,000 people left, and that kind of gives rise to the question around, like, okay,
people had to go underground.
People had to go underground.
Survive.
Yeah. So, and that was said to be 74,000 years ago or something. But you have these correlating events and stories, like the flood myth, the myth.
Yeah, and there's loads of underground everything as you dig into it. Like there's a place called Derinkuyu in Turkey that Graham Hancock has spoken a lot about. And this is a city that I think housed something like 30,000 people, and it was entirely underground, and it's 13 levels deep, which begs the question, who carved that, how, why? Were they preparing for something they knew was going to be coming? How did they know it was going to come? It raises a lot of questions, but there's so much underground that we're not really told about, and it's there to find if you go looking.
So you've mentioned that within biogeology, that biology or geology is biology.
Yes.
Can you break that down a little bit for us? I've seen the video of you going around and showing.
Well, it's igneous stone. I wouldn't describe as biology, right? Because that's coming from lava. So it's a little simplistic, but it's a catchy title. I think in one of my most recent streams, I titled that.
Yeah.
But real quickly, I'd just like to go back to the volcanoes and plasma, because the biggest plasma storms that we've ever seen are over volcanoes, because the ash is conductive, and they've recorded these events. Just in recent years, they got this incredible footage of, tens of thousands of lightning strikes happening over this volcano, and it's incredibly impressive. But we have this thing called the Ring of Fire, which are all of the big volcanoes that go around the Pacific Rim. And if you imagine a time like you're talking about, where there's 1,000 years of electrical activity, and all of those volcanoes were going off at the same time, the ash would spew up into the sky, it would block out the sun, but all of that would be conductive, and we could get incredible plasma storms. So if you take there's a channel called Night Light in Sky, I believe. He's got a big YouTube channel, and he just does science experiments. And he did this one video where he took a couple of different powders, chromium oxide and another one, and he put it into a crucible, which is just like a votive candle, thick glass wall with a little ceramic lid and a little bit of steel wool for conductivity, puts it inside of a microwave, which is powered by a magnetron, which creates plasma. And he turned that thing on, and in 10 seconds, these two powders are transmuted. They mix together, and they form raw ruby. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's wild, because ruby is like a 9 on the hardness scale, diamond being 10. And I remember as a kid we were told that a diamond is from a lump of coal that has been pressed on for 1,000,000 years with 1,000,000 pounds of pressure, right? Well, this guy is creating in 10 seconds from 2 different powders mixed together, ruby, in a household microwave. And so what we're talking about really is a transmutation of elements, which is not really acknowledged by the mainstream science, except in the heart of suns, where the fusion and the gravitational pull and pressure are giving rise to all the novel elements of our periodic table. But just the fact that he can do that in a microwave in such a short amount of time, and there are many different examples of anomalous finds and experiments that I've shown on my channel that really tug at the threads of those mainstream narratives. And then back to your question, because I was going to link them together and I forgot what you asked.
The idea that geology is biology.
Yeah. So we have the paramineralization idea of how things turn to stone, and that's the explanation for your petrified forests that people can go pay to see and buy a little piece of petrified wood. But the lost my train of thought.
It's okay.
Car went by and distracted me.
Geology is biology, linking the two together. Plasma, transmutation of elements.
Thank you. Now it's even more gone.
Well, okay, I'll fill the space.
It'll come back.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah.
There was something else you
Early in
brought
the
up.
morning, and it was a late night.
It was a late night. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, settled science, which is a term I'd only just heard, from being at Living Free Festival, was a bit of a faux pas. First of all, to have science as something that's settled, but that settled science or conventional wisdom doesn't acknowledge the alchemizing of what am I saying? They don't acknowledge alchemy
Right.
of elements.
Yeah,
Right?
that was where I was going to go with. It was biological transmutation. So there's transmutation through something like plasma, like the example I gave in the microwave.
Yeah.
But there's also biological transmutation, and this isn't acknowledged either. And this, the wonderful example I always give is the chicken egg. And people have examined the diet of a chicken because the chicken egg is comprised almost entirely of calcium.
Yeah.
And so they looked at it and they're like, that's a lot of calcium that chicken is pumping out every day. But it's not eating a diet that's rich in calcium. It's going around eating seeds and different things, and it's like, so they started to measure how much of the calcium was going in and how much was coming out. There's more calcium in just the eggshell than there is in the diet of the chicken. And that's not counting the calcium that would be needed to maintain its own bones. So right off the bat, you have to conclude that the chicken is taking in these different elements and somehow biologically transmuting them to create calcium, which is an element. So the chicken egg debunks the periodic table, as we're told, in my opinion. I could be wrong. I'm sure geologists or other physicists would have a different opinion, but I haven't seen any rebuttals to those questions.
Yeah. Well, the thing that comes up immediately for me, there's two things that comes up immediately for me. The first thing was, there must be some explanation, right? That's the first thing that comes up, and which I think is where a lot of people stop when it comes to the paradigm that we've been given. And when something comes in and challenges it, you go, yeah, that makes sense, but I'm not going to accept that because there must be some explanation. And the next thing that popped up was a potential explanation. Is it possible that the calcium is leached from the bones of the chicken over the course of its life, and it gradually, disintegrates?
Where to get them to begin with? It's.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
It's this whole idea of there must be some explanation is really, or the experts all agree, or this isn't my area of expertise, so I'm going to defer to somebody who's spent their life studying these subjects. That's a logical fallacy that's known as an appeal to authority, right? So they're the experts, and I shouldn't even begin to try and discern whether this is true or not because I don't have the background. So you're outsourcing your own ability to be rational, to think logically, to recognize whether an argument has solid reasoning. And so a lot of people, we're not taught logic and rhetoric and these kinds of subjects unless you specifically take them in college. They're not taught to children. We should be teaching them these kinds of things so that they learn how to think, not what to think. They're just taught to memorize and regurgitate. There's not a whole lot of teaching people how to recognize whether an argument is cogent or not. And so then you have the experts, and so we're appealing to them. Peer review itself, this idea of you have a whole group of academics that the highest level of science is said to be, the double-blind controlled study, and who determines whether that study gets published or not? The peers.
Same group.
So they're reviewing that material to determine whether it should be in the publication or not. So what happens if the material that's coming in, the new theories, the new ideas, the new experiment, what if they are in complete conflict with the underlying ology or the things that the tenured professors have been championing for decades, and it would just render their life's work meaningless? What's the likelihood they're going to allow that study in that's going to be so disruptive?
And I've got an image of a scientist who has science's best interest at heart, and that will be sticking to the idea of progress. But I think it can't be overstated enough people's need to defend an identity and something that they've built over their lifetime. I mean,
especially if they have a vested interest.
That's right. Yeah, it's their livelihood, it's their reputation, it's everything.
I coined the term paradigm blindness.
I love it
because I don't think that most of the academics are out there trying to mislead people at all. I think that they believe in what they're sharing, and it doesn't matter what subject we're talking about. I'm talking about all the ologies when I talk about this. Is that there's an expression they say, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, it doesn't matter what your answers are. So if the core foundational ideas that are your ology is built upon are faulty, then you're not gonna recognize that because you've been raised in that paradigm. We've all been raised in paradigms, and so when something comes in that challenges that, we have knee-jerk reactions to it, and we push it away because we're blinded by that paradigm, because we don't understand that maybe it's completely wrong, and there's a whole other way to look at things. And so this is true of the expertitis, the inflammation that of people who think they're experts in subjects, and all of a sudden they close themselves off. And then there's a compartmentalization in academia as well as in politics, government, military-industrial complex, and this compartmentalization, it doesn't lead to a cross-pollinization of ideas in seemingly unrelated topics, right? Everyone's in their little narrow category, and they say that being an expert means knowing more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about nothing.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So maybe tie this into what I've researched. It started with a mountain in Spain, and I just was entertaining the idea because I thought it was fanciful. I was like, oh, this is kind of fun, because I was exposed to different channels that were talking about the subject of titans, and that maybe titans once existed. Now, we're not talking about giants. We're talking about beings that were the size of mountains, right? Like a mile tall. And in the town that I live in Spain, there's a big mountain that is known as the elephant, because it looks like an elephant that's lying on its stomach with its head tilted back, and it slopes down, and there's a plateau where the trunk would be, and there's a cave where the eye would be. There's a a discoloration of the mountain that's like a quarter moon right where the ear would have been. There, the head ends and then it curves in on both sides to the shoulders. There's a spine. There's a rib cage. I mean, so going back to pareidolia, there are a lot of people who share pictures of mountainscapes that look like faces. It looks like a being laying on its back, and a lot of people just immediately believe that it is that. And I was always like, well, I like pareidolia. I make abstract art where you can see faces in the art. So I enjoy that from a creative perspective. And I can always see things in things. But I'm also very left brain and analytical. And so I'm like, okay, that does look like a face, but where's the follow-up? Where's the on-site investigation? Where are the photos from other angles? Are they accounting for the fact that maybe the shadows are hitting just right, or there's foliage that's adding to it that has nothing to do with the mountain itself? It's just something growing on the mountain. And so when I was looking at this elephant, I'm like, I got to get on Google Earth, because you can view things, you can tilt, and you can view things in 3D. And so within an hour on Google Earth, I had found 10 different anatomical features. And that's already a big number, right? It's one thing if you see a face from one angle. It's another thing if the head shape is right, the eye placement is right, it appears there was an ear.
Proportions are correct.
Yeah, and you have, all of a sudden you have a list forming. Well, it should be, logically, that the longer and more specific that list is, the less likely it is to be some random trick of the eyes, right? And and I like games of chance. I like to play backgammon where you're trying to get the double sixes. You need that to win the game or something. Well, it's one thing to roll double sixes. It's another thing to roll it 10 times in a row. Right? That the odds of that are astronomically small.
And so now you've got a list of over 50 consistencies between what you're seeing and what's considered to be.
Yeah, that initial investigation on Google Earth led to an in-depth boots on the ground investigation where I went in the caves. I was analyzing the structure of the stone with microscopy. I was comparing with anatomy. I was getting out, I found 3D photography, or not 3D, but just a video of an elephant's skull where you can see it from every single angle. And I just started to play this game of what if that really was once a titan? I knew it was a crazy idea to begin with, but I was just like, well, why not? This is a fun intellectual exercise. This is the thing. So many people, when it comes to the flat Earth topic is very hot, hotly contested, because it's one of those things. It's like that's the batshit craziest idea you can imagine, that the Earth might not be what we were taught, but. When I went through school, that was a sign of intellectual maturity, that you could entertain ideas that maybe you didn't believe, and examine the evidence in favor or against them to come up with your own conclusions. And so that it should be fun. It shouldn't be like there's a knee-jerk reaction to, no, this is stupid. Everything is already known about the universe, and we're just trying to fine-tune the final little bits, the little puzzle bits that we're putting into place. And so as I started to dig into this, I found so many things that were lining up in ways that I never would have dreamed of, and many of them were highly specific. And this isn't just me saying this. I've documented it all with photography and video. Like I said, microscopy. I've gone and spelunked in the caves. And
you have a history of histology as well, so understand.
Right, as a chiropractor, I studied a lot of anatomy, and I studied histology, which is the study of tissue. And so I was already looking at things going, wow, this looks really biological, but I knew what the mainstream model was as far as petrogenesis, so I knew that it couldn't be what I was thinking it was, right? So there's, again, the paradigm blindness, is we recognize something and go, oh, wow, that looks like this, and then we dismiss it because it couldn't be, right? Instead of realizing that maybe what we were taught was wrong, and what we're actually seeing is what it appears to be. You know?
There's also a phenomena where we do create our own echo chambers. We hear about it a lot with our algorithms and whatnot on social media, but also the group's consensus, or at least our perception of the group's consensus, is largely the way that our view of reality is shaped, to the point where I brought this up on my last podcast. In Australia, if you say, "Oh, I see ghosts," let's say 80% of people are going to be like, "Oh yeah, righto, whatever. I've never seen one. Doesn't exist," right? But you go to somewhere like Taiwan, where 70% of the population report seeing ghosts, because it's accepted by the group. You're allowed to see it, right? And so, you know, there's a point on one of your presentations where we're on the mountain, and you're showing. Sorry to jump ahead, but we'll jump back and come back to it. But there's where you're showing a chunk of stone that perfectly resembles spongus bone or trabecular bone. And when you first said it to me, I'm like, okay, but that's rock, right? But that's rock. And my mind was going, that's rock. And it took me about 5 different presentations for you to get to that point, for my mind, for the lenses to unfurl, and for me to go, oh my God. Now I actually, we zoomed out, and now I've got something in my mind clicked, and it was like a gradual letting go of what I imagine the group consensus is, and I allowed myself to see it. And then I saw it in a completely different way. And I think, to your point before about geologists, biologists, they're only sticking to their one narrow lane. So the idea that you're going to be able to bring a biologist to the mountain, they're going to see biology, or a geologist to the mountain and they're going to see biology, they're just not, it ain't going to be the case necessarily.
And this is what I was saying about cross-disciplinary pollination, is that there's no overlap between anatomists and geologists.
Yeah.
Why would there be?
Yeah.
Maybe archaeologists and anatomists, because they're trying to excavate and uncover something. But a geologist, they're not going to be thinking in terms of histology or anatomy, because the whole story they've been told about how everything is formed doesn't account for that.
Yeah. So sorry, getting back to exploring.
Over the course of 2 years, I accumulated over 50 different correlations with that mountain, which is an astronomical number.
Have you calculated the odds yet on?
I wouldn't even know how to begin.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'll give you an example, because I went up to the eye. You know, it's like 375 meters altitude, and when I got on Google Earth, I was just like, this is nuts, but it's so cool. Like, I'm finding all these things, like, what if, you know? And so I got out my anatomy books from school, and I was looking at the eye socket and just refreshing my memory on the anatomy. And our eyes are, there's 7 bones that meet to create the eye socket. And they meet in these points called sutures. And then there's spaces between them for, like, the optic nerve and other things, the blood vessels and whatnot. And so even though skull shapes vary dramatically between, like, an elephant's skull and our skull and other animals, the bones that comprise the skull are essentially the same. And so I knew that, and I thought, okay, well, I'm finding all of these macro features that are crazy, you know, that already, when you've got a list of 10, that's like kind of moving beyond pareidolia. That's either like the universe is messing with me, or there's something to this, because it's like very, you know, far-fetched that you would find so much just like immediately. And so I started to make a laundry list of what I would expect to find if I were to get inside of an eye socket, right? If I were in it, then I could look that way and that way.
Yeah.
And I'd been at that cave multiple times, and I'd already puzzled over how the heck did this thing form, because it's way up there. I'm like, water erosion couldn't do it unless the ocean levels were 400 meters higher than they were, and over how many millions and millions, you know, it's like I didn't know, but I marveled over how biological it all looked, you know, and so then I had this list of features that I would expect to find, and I went up there, and within like 2 hours, and I documented it all. I photographed and filmed, and I made a video series called Unveiling a Titan, and it's a 6-part series. The first is just an overview of the idea and introducing the concepts and try to make it in a palatable way, because these are really hard ideas for people to even begin to entertain. I've taken on the task of championing some of the craziest ideas out there.
God bless you.
So I had this list, and I went up to the mountain, and I found so many. I'll give you a couple specific examples. So humans, we have a little hole in this bone called the infraorbital foramen. Infra just meaning below, orbital meaning eye, foramen meaning hole. And there's little blood vessels and nerve that go through here that drive this part of the face. Well, on an elephant, that's here. And on an elephant that's lying on its stomach with its head tilted back, that would be in front of the eye socket. And so I was already on Google Earth, I'm looking at the eye socket, and there's a cave going off perpendicularly in this direction. And I'm like, there's no way. I have to get up there and I have to look at this. And so I did, and the thumbnail to the 5th Unveiling a Titan video is actually looking through that hole, which goes perpendicular. So already that's weird. You got a cave here and another cave going perpendicular. They have a very biological look to them, and they're matching anatomy to a T. And then I'll give a second example, because I could go on and on and on.
Please do.
We could talk for hours just about the mountain.
Yeah.
And then there are all these other topics, like the giant trees, petrified organs, and there's like each one of these we could talk for multiple hours on.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I've got some very specific questions. I've done hours and hours and hours of listening to what you're saying, and so I've been writing long laundry lists, and I kind of had to let it all go and be like, whatever's going to come up when we're discussing
go with the
this,
flow.
we're going to go with the flow.
Right.
But I do want to cover heartstones. I do want to cover giant trees, because I actually haven't heard you speak too much about giant trees, but there's certain ideas around the petrification of trees and gemstones and quartz leading to gold, and also to the alchemizing of what you've mentioned, which I'll give a little preface it. You've spoken about the idea that amber is we're
told it's petrified sap.
We're told that it's petrified sap.
Yeah.
But your theory is that quartz is petrified sap.
Yeah.
But as2 is fat.
Yeah. Right.
But I'd like to know.
We'll come back to this.
Yes.
So let me just finish the thing I was talking about. So frontal bone, maxilla, right? And you've got all these meeting points of these 7 bones that make up the orbital foramen, or the orbit of the eye socket. And so right here, there's a line. Like if I took the flesh away, you would see that this bone is meeting this bone in a line.
Yep.
Well, that line goes back in both directions in the eye socket, right?
Yep.
And so when I got up inside the cave and I looked over to that side, there was a line in exactly that place, and it kind of comes up at an angle and it jogs a little bit and then it continues up. And that's exactly what the elephant skull that I was examining does in the exact same location. Now, you might think, oh, it's just a random chance that there's a crack in the cave at that point. But it's not a crack. It's 2 different, slightly overlapping bodies of rock that are meeting. There's no crack there.
Wow.
So it's just like, that is so highly specific. So when you are talking about calculating odds, like, how would you even begin to calculate the odds on something like that? I don't know. So over the course of 2 years, over 50 anatomical features. After I'd made 4 videos on the subject, I went back in an interview and I'm looking at the mountain and I'm trying to show live, like I had done in live streams and in my videos, these different features that I'd identified to a friend of mine named Rodrigo Ferrari Nunes. He has a PhD in anthropology, and he was very interested in my subject because American Indians, like the Salish Indians and different Indians around, indigenous tribes around the world, they talk about this stuff as fact. And he was fascinated by what I was presenting, because I'm not coming at, like a lot of people who talk about this kind of stuff, or young earth creationism, they're coming at it from a biblical perspective. They're Bible believers, and they're accused of warping reality to fit their religious beliefs, and they're just trying to come up with whatever they can to defend their religious beliefs. I didn't have,
That's actually one of the things.
That as a, yeah, go
That's
ahead.
one of the things that I really appreciate, and that I wanted to preface, and I had to plan to preface all these things, but as soon as you get to it, everything changes. But I really appreciate your approach to this, because when I'm looking at somebody making, seemingly outlandish claims, you can generally sense a type of a vested interest in this being true, right? Because they've spent X amount of time in their life invested in it.
Yeah.
It has to pay off. But with you, I didn't feel as though it'd be cool if it is true, but you didn't seem to. It wasn't like this. This has to be true, or my identity is completely cracked.
Right.
And which I asked you last night too. Which probably go on.
I just wanted to finish before I forget. So I was in this interview, and I went to go show him the eye and to show him this other hole and these things that I just described, and they were blocked out on Google Earth.
Oh, I know that was yeah.
And they were blocked out in the weirdest way. First of all, it looked like it was done by hand.
Yeah.
Right. Second of all, if you zoomed in really close, the eye would slowly open up, and then if you backed away, it would close. And then you zoom in, and I'm like, I've been doing this hundreds of times over the last couple of years. I've never seen this before. It's still that way. So the eye and the ear now are blocked out, and you can't see the whole mountain on Google Earth and see the eye and the ear because they're blurred out.
So the ears are really.
So that's like, okay, is that some random rendering glitch that just happened to affect the eye and the ear?
Yeah.
Or has someone intentionally gone in and changed it so that people can't get the big picture that I was trying to show? But in a sense, they shot themselves in the foot, because I had already made videos and I had used Google Earth like as a drone, because you're not allowed to fly drones there. So I was filming with my PC as I'm doing Google Earth. And so I had all of that original footage, so I was able to show the before and afters. And there were a lot of people who were on the fence about my theories who had been like, okay, this is fascinating stuff he's showing, but still pretty far-fetched. And then they saw that, and that was the tipping point for them. Like, okay, now I'm on board, because obviously you're touching on things that people don't want.
Which just raises the question: who actually knows about this, and as fact, and why would they want
and who
to
would make that kind of decision?
Yeah, who makes that decision? Who's this overlord that goes, Mike's finally figured out Titans. We don't want humanity to know about Titans.
I think it's hilarious too, because now, like, as you zoom in and out, it's like the mountain is winking at you like this. I'm like,
yeah, you son of a bitch. Yeah.
So the one eye club,
The ear, which has also been blocked out.
That was, yeah.
So you'd mentioned that you were looking at, obviously, proportionately, the ear should be around about here, and you'd found that there was...
it was like shaped like a quarter moon, and it was a discoloration, or not discoloration, but basically the mountain is white or gray. It's limestone, the mountain, which ironically mainstream geology tells us is comprised of bone. And so it looks like an ear would have been like torn away, right?
Off, yeah.
And so I didn't have any idea. After I examined the eye in depth, I started to hypothesize, because of that shape, that there might be an ear canal somewhere. And so I tore a crossband in my knee, hiking up and coming down, trying to get to this thing, and kind of messed myself up there for a while.
Maybe you do have a vested interest in this being true then. Not for nothing.
I had a vested interest in finding out if it was true.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
It's not. Anyway, so I found out just randomly while I was doing a Google search that there was a cave up there, and I had hypothesized that there might be, but there's this canyon that goes up, and I was just trying to figure out how to get up to that section of the mountain, and I saw this thing, Cova del Migdia, which Cova is Valenciano for cave, and the cave of midday, and I'm like, there's a cave there? I wonder where the cave is, because this barranca goes right up to where the ear is. And it turned out, I felt like I walked into a movie at this point, because there was a team of geologists and archaeologists who had gone up to this cave, and they needed ropes and harnesses and everything to get up to it. and they had done the most thorough excavation of a cave in European history at the point when they did that. They brought in 3D mapping equipment, 3D photography. They filmed every step of the way as there were skeletons that were found up there. There were cave paintings, and the cave paintings are far out because the cave paintings, 2 of them look like a 4-legged creature with horns, and another one looks like a deluge, like a major thing where animals are raining down from the sky. I mean, this is what's on the wall up there, and then there are these animals, and so they had this 3D footage. They did much better job than I ever could have done myself, and I didn't even know it existed. And so when you see it, and all of my Unveiling a Titan videos start with some clips from their work, so you can see this. I'm not just saying it. Check it out. Decide for yourself if I'm nuts or not. But it looks a hell of a lot like an ear canal going in. And it's like, what are the odds? Again, this is the specificity, and I didn't even know it existed until I began this adventure. So I just wanted to finish that up because it's such an important thing between what appears to be an intentional censorship on Google Earth, and then this team of archaeologists that have, found these incredible finds in the ear canal of
most
Montgo.
thorough excavation of a cave in European history.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, it's almost like they knew something.
Yeah.
Like, why would they have done that? And like, in such a random place. Of all the caves there are in Europe that they could have, explored in such depth, it was that one.
Which just
and
validates.
I didn't even know that it was there. It was like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
So back to your other question about the big trees and the elements that are in the trees and quartz and gold and all these things, and I'm going to tie this into what we were talking about before with religion and people being biased by their religious beliefs. After I was about a year or so into producing videos to share these findings, I came across a channel called Hangman1128, which was a guy in Colorado who had been doing kind of what I had been doing with the mountain, but with the evidence, the remains of the great trees. Now, when I say the great trees, think Avatar, the movie Avatar, which is interesting that movie was this #1 movie for like over a decade, and it just really made an impression on the psyche of people. And I think there's like a collective unconscious memory of maybe a time before, the antediluvian period before the flood, where everything was bigger, and even the mainstream, narrative says that it was pre-Noah's flood. Whether you're a Bible believer or not, the flood occurred. All of the civilizations around the world have that in their historical record, that there was cataclysm. Like you're talking about 1,000 years of lightning. I don't know what the evidence of is for that, but there's no doubt that there was major flooding that happened that was worldwide, and so that. So Mike Alley, who's Hangman1128, he's very much a Christian, very much a Bible believer. So for him, when he was looking at the remains of the trees and documenting the evidence in favor of this idea, this was just edifying his faith. This is confirmation that the things in the Bible are true, and he's not coming at it from a left-brain, mainstream scientific perspective, and he's not analyzing all of the mainstream narratives and comparing them to in the same way that I've done with this biogeology subject. But that doesn't mean he's not right, and that's the thing is just because the creationists they're PhD Christians who are geologists who are challenging mainstream geological narratives. But their criticisms are dismissed because clearly they have a horse in the race and they have a vested interest in confirming their book, right? Yep. And I didn't have that as a hindrance when I was exploring these things because I didn't have that attachment. Yeah. I'm not criticizing Mike in any way. I think the work he's done is phenomenal, but it's not palatable to an atheist or somebody who's critical of the Christian faith, or somebody who thinks these are fairy tales. They're not gonna. They might be turned off instead of like seeing the forest for the trees, literally, and like going, oh my God, these things he's showing are unbelievable. and they're self-evident proofs. This is an important concept. Like, some proofs may be self-evident. Like, things may be what they appear to be, even if we've been taught there's something completely different. And that's an important idea. Is like, we get into the heart, and if we have time, the unraveling of the heart and the rolling up the structure of the heart was discovered in 1972. The true structure of the heart, that in and of itself is a self-evident proof. When he shows it, it proves itself.
Yeah.
You don't have to come up with some scientific experiment to prove it. So if I'm looking at tree and all the different ways that tree breaks down, and I see that these little chunks to this, and then it breaks down to the forest floor and everything, and I see all of these different manifestations of tree, and then I see a one-to-one correlation with the mountain that's right above the tree, and it is doing the exact same thing on every scale, and it's identical in every way. Is that just like, oh, my mind is playing tricks on me, or things just tend to look like things? Or is there a direct correlation? In my opinion, when I saw his work, I shed tears because I was so blown away, because it was undeniable to me what he was showing. And I wasn't coming at it from a Christian faith perspective at all. I saw it for what it was, and the proof is self-evident. So I recommend everybody, like, go to his channel, check out his videos, and watch him. And if you're not a Christian and you're kind of turned off by the whole, just ignore that part. Just look at the evidence he presents, because it's all empirical, HD, 4K footage, on site, inside, out, up and down. And if you have the eyes to see it, you'll understand that it is tree in every way, shape, and form. And we're talking, so back to Avatar. We're talking about trees that were miles wide, maybe many miles wide at the base. So if you think of a 1 foot wide tree, how far up does it go? Right, that ratio of width to height, like, these things stretched up into the heavens. So Avatar, I think, is a tip of the hat to that ancient antediluvian past where everything was much greater, and then everything got destroyed and downsized for one reason or another. And now we're living in that post-flood world. And so Mike went into the trees in depth, and he came to the conclusion that more or less the entire periodic table of elements is coming from the trees in one way or another. And I agree with him, but I would add potentially titans to that list as well, that a lot of the novel elements that people go mining for and looking for are biogeology, and they're not coming about in the way that we were taught in the mainstream model.
2 seconds.
So the periodic table, we're told that the elements are formed in the heart of stars, which then supernova and spread out into the universe, and that's where we get, all these different novel elements. And they can create some of them in particle accelerators, and nuclear fission leads to different things happening. But that's one tale about how the periodic table comes about. But what if what we're actually looking at is biogeology, and that all of these different metals and minerals and different things that we know exist and we can mine for actually came from trees, petrified and not, creatures big and small of different types.
Transmutation of elements.
Transmutation of elements, back to the whole chicken egg thing, plasma transmutation. There may be, I've come to the conclusion, you've got the paramineralization story about how things petrify and that it takes hundreds of millions of years. It can be done with high mineral content waters. It can be done with electricity plasma. It can be done with high heat, right? That when they're making the petrified wood, they're heating the wood to like 1500 degrees. They're using argon gas, and I think they do an acid wash first, so that's not so far-fetched. We hear about acid rain, so there may have been times when the volcanoes were spewing up, or for some reason in the environment there was a high level of acidity, and then that makes a permeability to the material, and then it's either infused with high mineral content waters or whatever. They can do it in a laboratory, so it's possible, right? It's so
it doesn't take conventional understanding of time to achieve.
No. And we're told these stories about sedimentary layering and how long it takes for that to form, and we know how old things are based on what layer they're in.
But there's a logical fallacy to that, right?
Well, there's circular reasoning that's involved, where they tell us how old the layer is based on what fossils they find in it, but then they'll also tell us how old the fossils are based on what layer they're found. But regardless, that's all debunked by something simple like the eruption of Mount St. Helens, where you've got like 30 feet of sedimentary layering with micro thin layering that is indicative of something that formed over long periods of time gradually, and it formed in a matter of hours. And that's all well documented by mainstream geologists. That these are things that are challenging cornerstones of geology, but they'll hand wave dismiss that, and they'll say, well, yeah, that was just an anomalous event. Well, how anomalous was it? What if the whole ring of fire was going off at the same time, spewing up unfathomable amounts of ash into the sky, which would give us our plasma storms, which could lead to petrification, which could create all kinds of different, I've come to the conclusion that there's an infinite variety of outcomes, depending on what you start with and what happened to it. And so it's not just one thing, and people get caught up. It's got, this is the explanation. It's like, no, it could, like, for example, there's a lake called Lake Natron in Tanzania that's, it's got pH 12 water, which is highly, highly alkaline. Acid is the low number and base is the high number. And creatures fall in and they die because they can't survive the waters. And then they start to get encased in all the mineral content. And the longer that goes, the more solid it becomes. There's a cave called Mother Shipton's Cave in England where people go and hang objects from ropes, and the waters drip down the ropes and then surround the material that they've hung from the rope. And over like a 6-month period of time, it gets fully encased and then hardens. In my presentation the night before last, I showed there's a guy showing cross sections of different piping in different cities around the world, where literally the pipe is petrifying towards the center, because we're told these stories about stalactites and stalagmites in caves, that it's an accumulation of the minerals, and they talk about like 50 years for 1 centimeter, and so they can determine the age of the cave by how long the stalactite is and that sort of thing. But this guy's showing like 6 months, massive amounts of essentially petrification, calcification, whatever you want to call it. And he gave it's a wonderful clip. I've lots of presentations on my channel. Like everything on my channel is visual. It's all there's empirical evidence for everything that I'm talking about and presenting and suggesting, and check it out and discern for yourself whether any of it makes sense or if I just I'm off on a LARP.
Getting back to Montgo quickly, have you sent any any samples off to labs to?
With Montgo, I have. I've done microscopy. I've spelunked the caves. I've got the macro. I've got the micro. As far as sending off samples, it's interesting because the limestone that comprises Montgo, the mainstream narrative on how limestone forms is that you have compressed shell, mollusk, coral, and endo and exoskeleton that are crunched down into a layer over hundreds of million years of time, and that's how we get these limestone layers. And there is a type of limestone that looks like that. It's called coquina. Anyone who's familiar with Coral Castle in Florida, that castle, which was supposedly made by one guy moving multi-ton blocks through levitation, it's an interesting rabbit hole unto itself. That's coquina, and you can see the fragments of these different things with the naked eye. And I was criticized by a geologist who was like, "You're a fool. Are you suggesting that this titanic creature's bones were made of shell and coral and no, it would consume and maybe eat those things, but then it would assimilate them and make its own bone. It wouldn't be made of little pieces of other creatures' bones, right?"
It's not a sandcastle.
It's not a sandcastle, no. And so I was puzzled by that because I had been walking that mountain for years and I had never seen any fossils embedded in any of the rock, even though that's the mainstream narrative about how limestone is formed. And so this guy was mocking me because he's like, if you just looked with your eyes, you would see, and I was like, So I ended up buying a microscope, and eventually I bought a 1000x microscope that was Wi-Fi, and I could take my phone out and I could go up to these rocks, and I looked, and I kept looking and looking for any hint of any of those things. And even at 1000x, there was no hint of any of those materials. So I debunked, with a simple microscope, I debunked the mainstream narrative on the formation of that limestone. Because I don't care how many hundreds of millions of years you've got of compression. If that's how that stone was formed, there's going to be some trace of it somewhere, and there's not. But what you do have, and I'm going to just say that we're talking about calcium carbonate when we're talking about limestone. Guess what our bones are made of?
Calcium carbonate.
Right, and they're telling us in the mainstream model anyway that it's formed a bone because of all these other things that are compressed. So, what I noticed though was that there were two kinds of stone that comprised the mountain. There were large, thick blocks that were layered that had occasional channels that were larger going into them. So if you look at our bones, we have cortical bone, which is like in our long bones. You have the thicker part of the outer portion of the bone, which is the strong structure. And then inside, where the red blood and the bone marrow and all that stuff is going on, that is what's known as trabecular bone. And it looks like Swiss cheese, and it's fractal. So you have a hole, and then that hole has other holes going off in other directions, and then those holes have other holes going off in other directions. And that's where our red blood is formed. And so the whole inner portion of the bones, even our skull bones, it's like a sandwich. You have a bone here and a bone here, and then you have this trabecular bone. That's exactly what's on the mountain. You have the thick layers, and you have these big blocks of Swiss cheese looking limestone. And when you go up to it and you look at it, these channels, which we're told are formed from rivulets of acidic rain, for example, starts to carve little, cracks, and then those cracks widen. It's called karst, K-A-R-S-T. And that's how we're told this particular kind of limestone forms. But when you look at it, there's no in-between phases. They're all fully formed, and they bifurcate in a way that's impossible to explain with water erosion. Because the water wouldn't go like this and then turn a right angle and go off in other directions.
So essentially, like if it's starting through a smaller hole, why would there be a larger hole underneath it?
No, it's the other way around. Why would it start with, it would start with a crack that would widen, and that would be your larger hole.
Yep.
But there's no reason it's going to bifurcate and go off in different channels. Like the shape of our lungs or the shape of a tree, it's fractal, so it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's exactly what's happening with this stone on the mountain. But not only that, you have red earth, you have iron ore, and you have quartz. And early on I had theories about fat and things like brain, eye, disc, ligament, tendon, that when these petrified, that they would petrify to quartz. That was a theory I had early on. Well, also blood plasma, if you centrifuge the blood and you remove the iron, which is in the hemoglobin, from it, the red blood cells, you remove those, you have the plasma. And if you take all the water out of the plasma, what you're left with are long-chain fatty acids, which are like olive oil, almond oil, salmon oil, these, fish oils, that kind of, it's this yellowy oil. And if you remove all the water from that, it's called human serum albumin. You get these crystalline flakes, and they look like quartz crystal, right? And so I'm examining this stone on the mountain, and the whole mountain is red, like red earth, and then you've got in these channels iron ore that's just sitting in the channels, and then quartz crystal is everywhere, and then sometimes that quartz crystal is lining these passages. And I've got evidence for all of this on the channel. So what are the odds of that? That this thing that looks like a big titan is also made of something that even mainstream geology tells us is bone, and then those rocky structures are matching our cortical and trabecular bone along with the components of blood.
Yeah.
Right? This is why there's over 50 correlations, because like every time I went looking, I'm like, what about that? And it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh my, again, it's just like.
Have you walked any or hiked any other mountains that you've noticed have similar features? Like you've spoken about the different type of bone that you're coming across as you're scaling the mountain, like the sutra lines.
Yeah.
Where it follows this, or you could explain it better, but the two bones coming together in the skull, it's not a clean. There's a type of zigzagging.
Oh yeah, like in the skull.
In the skull,
that's particular. Like in the eye sockets, no. But like the skull it is like a zigzag, almost like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. And you see that up
and
the
at the
mountain.
top of the mountain, I filmed at the very top where you would have like the parietal bones. Like as you get up onto the very, close to the peak of the mountain, which is the top of the head, there's a section there where you've got all of this smaller stone that's like turned vertically, and it does exactly that. And it's just
and that was on
one
the skull.
more of the 50,
Yeah. That was on what would be the skull.
Yeah. So there's so much. The series. I went back up with some friends to show them what I had found in the eye socket, and one of them noticed there's this feature inside the cave that's separate from the cave. So there's the cave, and then there's this cresting rocky structure that sticks up right exactly where an eyeball would have been. And so I theorized early on that whatever petrified the beast might have blown out the eyeball, but the eyeball is anchored in the back of the eye sockets. So maybe that rocky structure was the remains of the eye, but I didn't know how to prove it. But when you get up close to it, it's got bifurcating channels like blood vessels going into it. And then when I was there with my friends, one of them noticed that there was the whole backside of the structure was covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz that was very defined in lines and layers. And so this cresting thing sticking up, the whole backside of it was covered in quartz crystal. And I'm like, the sclera of the eye, the whites of the eye is fat. So that was in perfect alignment with the theory. And then that whole structure goes down to a point which enters into the back of the cave, and there's a little hole beside that you can shimmy down like 15 feet. It's creepy to do. And then when you get to the end of that hole, it opens up into another big cavern inside that a friend of mine told me existed, and he took me to it. And that's exactly where, if you went to the eye socket and behind and down, that's where our sinuses are. So we have a space there, right? It's just...
So have you found any other mountains that have these consistencies?
Yeah. So all the mountains in the region are limestone, right? They're made of this same stuff. But what's lacking are caves to explore, discernible anatomical features. All of the mountains in the entire region have been terraformed. There are these limestone terraces that stretch all the way up to the top of the mountains on every single mountain in the region. And when you look at the limestone terraces, it's just piled rock making terraces for agriculture and water catchment. And if you look closely at the rock, you find that all of the sides of the rocks are broken, except there will be one side that is unbroken. And that side is smooth and has all kinds of little channels going through it that look very biological. So someone, once upon a time, who knows who and when, broke up all of this limestone on all of the mountains in the region, probably to free up the nutrients that were inside in the form of red earth, iron ore, and quartz and all of that. Used those broken pieces to create these terraces. In the 6th video of the Unveiling a Titan series, I show every mountain. So the mountains were terraformed, so we don't really know what those other mountains look like before they got to them.
Does terraform mean mined?
Terraform just means they've changed the shape of the earth through mining, through different processes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so I've been planning to make a video for a while called The Caves Are Key, because 20 of the 50 anatomical features on the list are related to the eye socket, its placement, the things that I found inside. So if it wasn't for that and for the ear, I would have had maybe 15 or something with the macro, and it wouldn't have been enough for me to like run with this and make videos about it, but I kept finding thing after thing after thing. So and it's the same with Hangman's work when it comes to the trees. There's so much. There's way more evidence for the trees than there is for Titans. Like, I kept waiting for someone else to do what I did on some other mountain. You know, these pictures that I talked about, that people are like, oh, it's a Titan, it's a Titan. You know, well, where's the follow-up? Where's the cave exploration? There's one that looks like a human lying on its side, and there are two caves, one on top of the other, exactly where eye sockets would be. It's an amazing sight, but I've never seen any video footage, anyone who's gone into those caves to like just ask the question, it looks like eye sockets. Is there anything else inside that also looks like it would be an eye socket?
Maybe you're the man to do it.
I need to find out where that is and maybe organize a trip, crowdfund it or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, gold, silver, copper, all kinds of gemstones, these different things. This is all tree. When you see it, you can't help but see it. So, fat petrifies to quartz, sap petrifies to quartz.
Yeah,
We talked about amber. So we're told amber is petrified sap, and they have these narratives that have to do with Jurassic Park and recreating the dinosaurs because, like,
don't you ruin my childhood, Mike?
because mosquitoes that were sucking the blood, how they got through the skin of the dinosaurs, I don't know, but they were sucking the blood of the dinosaurs, and then they got encased. Well, maybe they were really big mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Damn.
But they're not. We don't find this. But we don't find the large mosquitoes.
Oh, I don't know.
At least in Jurassic Park,
I don't
it's
know,
a little.
maybe.
It's a knob on the top of his walking stick.
So maybe they got it through the eye or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the point is that the idea is that they're going to extract the blood, which is still preserved in the amber because it's anaerobic, so it wouldn't have broken down, and then they're going to use that to recreate the dinosaurs. That's the whole Jurassic Park narrative. But the point is that it's not petrified at all. You can dent it with your finger. It's a 2.5 on the hardness scale, diamond being a 10, right? So to me, that's oxidized sap. And if you see sap come out of a cut tree trunk or something, it will oxidize and it will harden to the point where it feels like it's on its way to stone, right? Well, if you look at the work of Hangman, and I've got plenty of it on my channel as well, I traveled with him for a week in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and it was an incredible experience because he's been studying this for like 7-8 years. He took me to the best sites that he's found over many, many trips that he's taken to this part of the world. And it's not just there, it's everywhere. As I show in my presentations, when you have the eyes to see it, you realize that it manifests everywhere and it's in plain sight, but we've all been blinded by a paradigm that tells us that this is impossible. So we don't see the evidence. And so I got to get there up front, up close and personal, film in HD, and there were so many times where I couldn't tell the difference between like a regular tree, a piece of wood that was, on the ground and decaying, and a stone beside it that had the exact same qualities in every way, except one is stone and one is wood. And then when you understand that if you harm a tree, the sap is going to come out, and just like we have scabs, it's going to form a scab. Well, that's what's happening with the quartz, is that you have quartz seams, and the quartz is the sap of the tree, but it's petrified, quartz being about a 7 on the hardness scale. And then when they want to find gold, silver, copper, where do they find it? They mine quartz seams. So we have monatomic, which is just like microscopic particles of these metal elements in our bloodstream as well. And if you take wood, for example, or flesh, like if a human gets hit by a lightning bolt, it creates a fractal pattern in their skin, a scar that stays, right? Like a Lichtenberg figure.
Damn it, we have so much to cover in so little time. Please continue.
Right, and so my theory is that if the plasma storm hits, destroys the tree, and starts to petrify things, you can take electrodes and put them on either end of a wood table, and it will burn a fractal pattern into the table that looks just like the Grand Canyon, or these Lichtenberg figures found around the world. Well, what's also happening is the novel elements that are in the wood are aligning themselves along the electromagnetic lines of the current. So that's how you're going to get your quartz, your gold veins and your silver veins. In my theories, is that the monatomics, which are free floating throughout our bloodstream, and they're like trace, what do they call that? The the electrolytes or trace minerals that are part of our conductivity and our signaling systems and everything. That those are all going to accumulate in centralized locations along the line of current. And so when they go looking for gold, and you can see raw gold when it's got all these tendrils, and oftentimes fractal, they're finding them in quartz seams. So it's the lifeblood of the tree with all of those other novel elements. I mean, it's just like everything matches up perfectly. And that's the thing, is these ideas seem really crazy initially if you're not familiar with the evidence in favor of them. But when you start to look at all the evidence, everything dovetails. Like it's a tapestry. It's not like, oh, I've got some crazy theories, and oh, I found this weird thing, and that came about in this way, and I'm just like making up some crazy shit to try and fit in with my wild theory. That's not what's happening at all. And then you get into the old texts from the newspapers from the 1850s to the early 1900s, before the Rockefellers overthrew education, medicine, and publication. And what you find is they're talking about all this stuff matter-of-factly, finding all these really bizarre petrified finds. There's all kinds of examples of petrified soft tissue in the historical record, anomalous stuff that doesn't make sense in the mainstream model, because we're told that larvae and bacteria and these different things, that they would consume the flesh long before that permineralization could ever happen and things could turn to stone, right? But, there they are, petrified jellyfish, fossils of fish eating another fish that's petrified. You name it. And then there's all kinds of weird things like, petrified hammer embedded in the stone, right? Or a spark plug that's embedded in stone.
Antikythera.
Antikythera.
A little bit older, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of very simple empirical evidence that debunks mainstream narratives, but it never shows up on people's radar. They don't know about it. They don't know why those different things are so important, like Mount St. Helens and those sedimentary layers, right? If all the volcanoes went off at the same time, that could happen all over the world, and that could account for a lot of what we call sedimentary
and
layering.
Also the Grand Canyon,
which is the biggest Lichtenberg figure on Earth. So if you look at what plasma does to wood, and then you see the Lichtenberg figures that are found around the Earth, the Grand Canyon is the biggest of them. So imagine a plasma storm so powerful that it could form the Grand Canyon. How big would a storm like that be? Right? Yeah. And how fast did it happen?
Yeah.
Was it like minutes or hours or days or months or years?
Well, is it something like, you were talking about where you put the two electrodes on the wooden table? Mm-hmm. If you start and stop that process, does it still follow the same current? Does it still follow the same track? Because that could probably answer your question. It does.
It does.
So it conceivably it could have happened over the course of many years.
Yeah, and it's fractal the whole way. It's not like it's incomplete. It's complete, and then the longer you run the current, the finer it gets, just like the branching, the fine, branches of a tree or our lungs or whatever.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, you're the first in titanogy, it seems. I hope more people...
Someone asked me on my channel, like, what the heck are you? Like, you're not a geologist, you're like a chiropractor, like, who are, what are you? And I was just like, I tongue-in-cheek answered, I'm a titanologist, just...
Well, not only are you a titanologist, but you're also the first hacker to go to prison in the United States. In the world? Was it in the world or was it in the States?
It wasn't prison, jail. But
jail. Oh, see, that's different. I didn't realize that was. I don't think we call it something different. We don't have a distinction for the two here.
Prison is more like for a longer period of time, for more serious offenses. But I have the unusual distinction of being the first hacker to go to jail for the crime of hacking in the world.
So, and that happened because, obviously because you hacked something, but in terms of why you were the first person to go to jail, for the crime of hacking was because they just made the
Yeah, there were hackers before me who went to jail for prison for things like fraud and other offenses, but they hadn't actually they hadn't created laws specifically for cybercrime, for illegal computer trespass. I was living in Seattle. I was 18 when I got busted in 1985, and I was.
I was saying yesterday, or the day before, I didn't know there was anything to hack back then.
Yeah, it was the beginnings of what we call the internet. Well, the beginnings came before with the military-industrial complex and ARPANET and this decentralized nodal network to protect us against nuclear war, so that if one site got taken out, the other sites would continue to be able to communicate and function. That's the backbone of what we call the internet today. And then later on we had, hyperlinks and mouses so we could navigate it. But back then it was all command line, and you had to know operating systems and to work your way around. But I was from the time I was about 13, I was a computer hobbyist, and then I got a modem, and I started learning things, and I connected with other people who were interested in similar stuff. Ended up traveling around and meeting a lot of those people who I found out years and years later, they turned out to be the most famous hackers of the era. So I was like hanging out with the best of the best, and I knew they were good, and they were the best I could find, but I didn't know these were like legends. And so, yeah, I was busted for infiltrating Microsoft and Boeing and Sunstrand and Kenworth Trucking in Seattle in '85. The court case finished in '86. I went to jail for it, and it is an absolutely crazy story, which most people, they don't know anything about it. They've never heard of me. If you search for it online, you have to kind of know what to look for to find it. A few of the AIs have caught on now. If you ask who was the first person in the world to go to jail for the specific crime of hacking, it'll come up with me. But I've finally written a book after 40 years. October 17th will be the 40-year anniversary of when I was busted, and I'm releasing it on September 17th next month. And there it is,
The
Hacker Prince. Won't be able to read the back, but it's a very fun read, and I've been blessed with some amazing people. The foreword of my book was written by Gary McKinnon, who was known as the NASA Pentagon hacker. He broke into like 90 different computers, and they were trying to extradite him for a decade from the UK to the US. And he came across my YouTube channel not knowing anything about my past as a hacker. And I was like, hey, by the way, did you know about this? And he's like, oh, no, we should talk. So we ended up having a bunch of conversations, and he wrote the foreword to my book, and got some other legends in there with some great reviews. And it's going to be fun that it's finally coming out after all these years.
So pre-orders September 7th. I don't think it's going to be out by September 17th.
Pre-order for Kindle is available already.
Sorry, say that one more time because I sneezed over you.
Yeah, so the paperback and the Kindle version will be available on the 17th of September, but the pre-order for the Kindle version is available now for people who want to just order it and not forget.
Brilliant, yeah. Awesome, man. Thanks so much. So I didn't actually.
It's been a pleasure.
I didn't actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you go.
No, you.
I didn't actually, when I said, the synchronicities that came, that sort of, I guess, aligned everything and brought us to where we are today.
Do we have another 3 hours?
Yeah. Is it a long-winded story?
It's stories, many, plural, because there have been so many. It's crazy. I actually have a live stream on my channel called Synchronicity Stream. It's spelled STREEM because it's got tree in the middle there, and it's all about all the synchronicities that happen in relationship to the trees and this research. And I tell some absolutely wild stories in that live stream that I did, and it's very entertaining.
Well, check that out. But the synchronicity I was talking about was how I found you. So I found you on the podcast, and I thought, wow, Mike would be an awesome person to talk to on my pod. But he's in Austin at the moment by way of Spain, which is where you live, which is where Montgo is. But then I went onto your Instagram, followed you, and saw that you were going to be in New South Wales, which is it was 5 hours north of where I live.
Where we are now.
Right now, within 3 weeks of the moment that I found out, and I went, well, that's a little too good to be true. So
that's a synchronicity,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks
and
so
you
much.
reached out, and I was thrilled to hear from you. It's been fun to get to know you and to have this conversation. And we can continue with others because we didn't even get to the heartstones, which are a whole gigantic rabbit hole in and of themselves.
Yep.
The idea that organs can petrify and be found separate from the body and in very large numbers. And I found many and many of them and identified all of the anatomical features. I show them side by side. These are things that should not exist in the geological record based on what we're told about how stone forms, that there's these broken fragments that are just banging around and rolling around in river bottoms, and that's why they become this smooth stone. And then they just happen to take on this shape that looks like a heart, but also has a whole lot of very, very specific anatomical features. I found one initially and I analyzed it in depth. I made videos about it. I got endoscopic cameras, went in, and I just could not believe it. That one stone had over 23 anatomical features, one rock. And I CAT scanned them. I went in with endoscopic cameras, and then I started finding them in droves because I was like, scientific method. If there's a truth to it, it should be repeatable, it should be scalable, and it should be highly specific. So I went back out looking to see if I could find other rocks that were matching this pattern, and I started finding them in droves. I've literally found thousands of them, and I presented all of the evidence on the channel. It's there for free. Check it out. And
what is the channel?
Keep an open mind. It's Stellium 7, Stellium, and the number 7.
Brilliant. Awesome, man.
And if you watch any videos, please make comments because the channel is highly algorithmed, and I hardly hear anything from anybody anymore. Even though there are people watching stuff all the time, nobody seems to want to comment.
The eye of Montgo is winking at you again.
Yep. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Right
Awesome,
on.
man. Thanks, bro. Appreciate it.